Welcome to the Comeback. This is another Orlando edition of our podcast. We've got an incredibly special guest today. I'm going to let Coach Chuck introduce him properly, but we welcome Dr. Tom Fisher, who's going to share some conversation about the subject of mental toughness. I think we all, have different interpretations of what that really means in our personal lives, our physical lives, our emotional lives, and we're going to try to dive deep into that whole subject, good, bad, and otherwise. And I think we've got the expertise in this crew. We tend as a group to run a little bit insensitive on the mental toughness side, so we're going to explore that a little bit and try to decide what level of toughness is relevant, not only for ourselves, but for the culture and the example that we set for our families and for our kids and for everything else. But within that, Chuck, I'm going to defer to you so you can introduce your dear friend. And thank you so much, Tom, for joining us.
I'm honored. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a true pleasure of mine to have my friend and colleague who I've known for almost 24 years.
Don't even go there.
We won't go there. Almost 24 years. I had met Dr. Tom Fisher. He once was a doctor back then when we were doing some study at UCF together, University of Central Florida. And Tom now, during the 24 years I've known him, has a PhD in exercise physiology. He's a licensed mental health counselor, has a master's degree in licensed mental health is your degree, correct? Also his exercise physiology is his master's. He's also the editor-in-chief of Muscle Media magazine. Also has his own practice of monumental performance. Tom is extremely unique because I have the ability not only to seek counsel from you at times, but also a lot of the athletes and individuals that I work with that need some sports psychology, some mental health development when it comes to adversity and resiliency. I refer to Tom. He, again, the clinical director of his practice of monumental health, monumental performance, has been extremely helpful to me, but also to the clients that I've sent to you. They tell me how much they've benefited.
Oh, great.
But in addition to that, Tom has more than 50 years of practice as a martial artist, as an instructor, as an examiner and referee in various martial arts. And if we can even add on top of that some of his, I suppose, time off in recreation, he's also a certified, if that is the correct word, certified sommelier in wine studies. So Tom, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be part of our podcast today. And I know there will be a lot of energy that you can display for us, but at the same time, a lot of interesting interactions that we'll have together in the topic of mental health and mental toughness. So thanks for being here, pal.
Man, pleasure's mine.
Yeah, so, from my perspective, I mean, we have several different perspectives here, right? So we have, a surgeon that comes from really inside of an operating room, and there's one viewpoint, right? And so at its greatest moment, as far as it relates to a comeback, that's where Dr. Masson has the opportunity to see somebody. They get to see somebody at their worst moment, then ultimately transitioning to their best moment. Chuck gets a chance to see people, as they get out of that environment, they're transitioning to corrective exercise and movement-based scenarios with the gait and motion analysis and trying to get them back to a better form and function to be able to be prepared for myself, who is more of a performance on the field operations type guy. For you, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the biggest factors that help people make that transition from the operating room to the clinical environment and then ultimately back to play?
Well, it's a matter of perspective, I think. The way that I describe it to my students out at the UCF is that we're all sitting around, the patient is in the very center of a round table, and each of us is sitting around the periphery. Each of us is viewing the patient, but we're taking a look at that patient from our various perspectives. Some of us are pre, some of us are pan, during, and some of us are post. And the object of the exercise here is to return the patient to pre-morbid functioning. In other words, get them back to where they were before, if not better. And so it really depends upon the individuals that you have surrounding that table, and that they can work seamlessly together in the best interests of the patient. Right. So I think that perspective is probably the most important thing, and this is what this team is all about here.
Yeah.
You do, but for the most part, a lot of the attention, a lot of the focus, a lot of the perspective is on the physical. But what I do, I see my role as a little bit different. I'm kind of a unique individual, and don't be impressed by all that stuff over there. That's just attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity. And, I'm just easily bored.
Right.
But I wanted to have my feet firmly planted, one in the psychological side of things, but the other in the physiological side of things. So I can switch hats and talk fluently and seamlessly about the physiology and about anatomy and functional analysis and all the rest of that happiness. In the next breath, I can start to talk about motivation, perception, persistence, and resilience.
And how they integrate, I'd imagine as well. Like there's always going to be a smooth transition from one to the next. It's not like just a cut and dry getting on to the next step. So
there's always overlap.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, the more centered people that I see, and I mean that centered within themselves, not around themselves. That's a very different conversation.
That's a good point.
But they are able to have an ability to maintain that perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, and as it relates to the Comeback team community at large, we're all going to deal with our setbacks, and setbacks come in a variety of aspects of our lives. And, one of the brilliant aspects of what Dr. Tom, his background is not only was he a naval aviator in fixed wing and helicopter, so he comes with that edge, with that mental toughness, with that extreme performance kind of upbringing. But, his expertise in exercise physiology and sports psychology and fundamentally performance psychology is something that organically the three of us have sort of stumbled into, through the School of Hard Knocks. We don't have the formal training, but we all talk about it a lot. And so one of the things that resonated the most to me and why I was so excited to have Dr. Tom join us is just his breadth of wealth and education and academic background in the psychology of performance and resiliency and the comeback. So as we look at these episodes, whatever your episode is and your setback, and however you think you deal with it, there are always strategies to improve your own capacity for resiliency. And our culture and our society and our determinations of expectations for disability versus recovery are really variable right now, more than ever. And I've never seen it at such a broad area. But one of the things we hope to do for this community is try to give you a strategy, a process, a fundamental, at least orientation in how to start the road to recovery when you have your own setbacks. So, Tom, as you see someone off the street, what questions are the first things you want to know about them before you start strategizing their comeback?
Well, that's interesting. I just had this conversation with a colleague, and we both agreed that it's difficult to take the doctor hat off. But when you see somebody, and it's not as if I'm doing an analysis of them at all, but my training has taught me to be very precise with the language, but also actively listen to everything. And, perception's 9/10 of the law. Some things are obvious, some things are less so. So it's that bridge. I'll tell you, in my practice, monumental performance, the majority of my practice, and I think we talked about this a little while ago, I wouldn't say that it's 60-40, 70-30, but let's just say 60-40. 40% of the people that I see are looking for performance enhancement. Yeah. They're looking to enhance their performance. There's nothing wrong. They just want me to run my psychological or physiological eyes over them and give an assessment, perhaps a little bit of guidance. The 60%, however, is usually devoted to rehabilitation after someone has been injured. And while you are all actively addressing the physical needs, they come in and the rest of their world is what I deal with. Their spouse, their children, their job, their future, their hobbies, their socialization, their this, that, and the others. All the rest of these things that each of us take for granted and just do as a matter of course, they're unable to. And there's a whole litany of emotional problems. And something that we have been talking about here is mental toughness, which is a concept that's very, very in vogue and quite chic today.
To your point, Tom, 12 years ago, and you talk about the rehab process, when I had my knee replacement.
Oh, yeah.
I was very active up to that point until the knee finally said, that's it, and I couldn't do anything for a while. And I was getting very concerned because my rehab was coming slow. Not only concerned from a physical standpoint, but was really affecting me up here, not just from the fact I couldn't do it, but in my mind, I was starting to have some self-doubt and identity crisis. I felt I was becoming somewhat inadequate in just, you talk about family, of just being able to provide or protect my family, or if something came up to me, I called you, I said I needed to talk to you. I remember sitting on your deck in your backyard, and we talked about identity, but I was saying that the process is just slow and I'm having difficulty dealing with it. A line that you told me that resonates with me to this day, and I'd like you to expand on it, is you can't push string. How I internalized it is this is still a process, and we have to accept what's going on, but we still have to have that mental resiliency to be able to strategize with that. Explain.
Well, you can't push string.
Again,
it's a matter of perspective.
Sure.
I mean, look, all of us are achievers. We like to do things, and if you're involved with the medical field at all, or you're involved with anatomy, physiology, et cetera, you know what you need to do, and yet you want to get it done as quickly as possible. You understand that in a cognitive sense, but your emotional sense is the thing that's going to give you fits, because you can't push string, you can't hurry it along, you can't make it happen any faster. You do what you're supposed to. Something I've discovered here, Chuck, you can speak to this. In the last 3 years, I managed to separate my right supraspinatus rotator cuff and had it repaired, and I'm back 120%. Now that's over. But in January, I was out playing with my dogs and I ruptured my right Achilles tendon, which I had surgery on as well. Now, I'm trying to push string all along because I've discovered through both of these injuries, and here I am at my seasoned age, I've never really been injured before. I've been hurt, but I've never been injured, sidelined. And I've discovered that I'm a hell of a lot better doctor than I am a patient.
Yeah.
Because even though I understand and I know, and perhaps that's the problem. I already know what I'm doing, and I know the expectations, but it's still the emotional side of things. Because you made mention, Chuck, about identity, and that's a very interesting point. Most of the people that I see in my practice, I see athletes and entrepreneurs, et cetera. I see achievers and risk takers, and each one of them, if you look at it from a certain model, the Kane model, commitment and necessary effort, it's immaterial to what it stands for. But the people have, whatever they do, their sport, their activity, it's utilitarian, it's interesting, it's important, or it's their identity. Now, as you get more involved, there's more and more of your life consumed with this particular thing. When you get to the point of importance and identity, any kind of an injury at that point, anything that's going to take you to the sidelines is going to have a profound effect. Now, if you reach identity, this is the way you identify yourself and the way you relate to the world and the way you greet the world and allow the world to greet you. You get injured when it's your identity, and perhaps it's a career-ending injury. If it's your identity, when they come to see me, it's not just, oh, well, that's okay, go take up bowling or go do something. No. We're going to have to reconstruct your very basic identity and role in society, and it's quite a handful. It's devastating.
Yeah.
And if you notice, a lot of the guys who do get injured, in sports become coaches, trainers.
Yeah.
They stay in the net. They go
Yeah.
in the back office or they stay in the front
Sure,
office
sure.
or whatever. But they keep their hands and their fingers in the pie.
Mm-hmm.
So having that identity issue, is
Yep.
that something that you find common, uncommon? And
That's
how
a-
would you help get somebody back on track?
Well, that's a great question, because you've got to understand the population with whom we're dealing. These are not normal people. So whatever's normal, whatever's ordinary, whatever's usual, whatever's standard, doesn't apply to these people because they're so far removed from that. They're light years beyond. So we're dealing with a rarefied population. We're dealing with a very small population to begin with, and then you're subdividing it. So athletes are different. I always make that, as a matter of fact, in one of my books, Performance Fears, as athletes are different. They see the world differently. They're willing to take risks.
Well, one thing that I think is, you mentioned earlier, it's the psychology of performance. And immediately a light bulb went off when you said that, because that's one aspect of it, the psychology of performance, right? And understanding what goes into performance to allow somebody to compete and perform at their optimum levels, right? From the psychology side. But then there's also the performance of psychology. If you look at it like that, like maybe somebody understands that something needs to happen, but they don't know the process. They don't understand the process. So how do you implement the psychology that you know and understand? There's a performance aspect to how you implement that process. And you know, from what I'm hearing you say a lot of things, and I'm sure that the people watching this podcast are going to agree. You're saying a lot of things like, yeah, okay, yeah. I've never been able to say that out loud, or I've never, articulated it like that. But now it makes sense. Athletes are different. If I have one of my golfers that's going to go to the U.S. Open, I don't want them going, oh, it's just another golf tournament. No, let's go ahead and accept the fact this is the U.S. Open, all right? So this is something different. Okay, but now that we've accepted that, the performance of that type of psychology, putting it into the right order, into the right action, allows me to leverage the value of it for good. And so once we start seeing that, when people get more comfortable with, and that's a whole nother one, right? But when they get comfortable with understanding the uncomfortable nature that those types of pressures bring as being an athlete, then the psychology can kick in and they start understanding how to deal with it better. So it's interesting to hear your perspective, especially somebody who is not just, as Dr. Masson was saying earlier, somebody who just kind of learned it along the way. I mean, he learned it by getting hurt and getting knocked down and getting back up again. Chuck learned it by striking out, being in a slump and striking out 5 times, but then hitting 3 home runs in the next game. We all have these ways that we bounce back and come back from individual issues, but the fact that you get to sit on top and see a lot of different issues, and quite honestly, you get unique ones all the time, right? So as soon as you get that unique one, you say, okay, now I have to formulate a way to deal with this. Now I need to learn a way to deal with that. I learned some of that from Dr. Masson too. He's been through so many different levels of so many different sports and so many different activities, and had to find his way to the top, in different ways.
No, well, it's funny because when you talk about the identity thing, and I think in a weird sort of way, that's been a blessing to me, because I identify with sport at large, but I don't identify with any one sport. You guys know that I've been playing a lot of serious tennis the last few years. I hurt my shoulder on my right side, and I couldn't play for several weeks, so I started playing left-handed. And what I was able to do,
Wow.
No, but one of the beautiful things was I didn't have the same expectations as my identity right-handed. I had even better expectations because now I had all this opportunity for growth. And so every single achievement was actually a happier day than any of my right-handed stuff was at the time. And it kind of opened my eyes to some things. And I think for most community members, you're not going to win the Masters. You're not, we talk about this all the time. We're trying to bring our culture of what our superstars do to people that have normal goals, normal lives, but still want to be relevant in things they love or they enjoy. And that versatility, that diversity, that ability to identify with the process and with the joy of learning new things within whatever your passion happens to be is such a critical part to resiliency. And
There's that word again.
It taught me so much to start over left-handed, and I'm not ambidextrous, but I didn't want to quit. And mentally and game-wise and strategy-wise, I picked things up that remember the uncomfortable
Yes, I do remember that.
paradox? Well, suddenly I'm uncomfortable in everything
Right.
on my left side. But you know what? It opened up strategy things that ultimately paid my right hand.
And you know,
self
I mean,
back.
I've seen this happen in the past. Somebody I've had a chance to work with in the past, Yvonne Lindell, who won 8 Grand Slams as a tennis player playing right-handed. He plays golf left-handed, and he came to me to get some different strategies from the performance training aspect to get better at his golf game. But he plays golf left-handed. So he had an entire Grand Slam career right-handed, right? But he plays the game of golf left-handed. And it's so funny you say that, because one of the things that he mentioned was, I didn't have the same expectations playing left-handed. Not only did I not want to mess up my right-handed, tennis stroke, but I didn't have the same expectation. It allowed me to almost start fresh and new and have a clean slate.
Are there any pearls that you could throw out from somebody who may not be in the athletic or competitive athletic world that is coming through a rehabilitation phase, that's trying to make their comeback?
Oh, sure. Sure.
What pearls can you throw out there that they may be able to latch on to and say, okay, what I'm going through is normal. What I'm going through is to be expected, but how do I then navigate to get even back to where I want to be?
Before you can do any of that, you need to understand that it's not just an either or. It's not a yin yang, because an oversimplification is, and this is kind of Neanderthal-esque, if you will, is that if there's a problem on the field, on the pitch, on the court, or the track, or whatever, insert venue here, then we're going to get back into the gym and double down. And if that doesn't work, then you're a head case. Yeah. You see, so it's either this or it's that. Yeah. But wait a minute, no. Then you would understand this. Differential diagnoses. It's not just a head case. You need to be specific. You need to make a differential diagnosis. So is it physical? If it's just physical, then fine. But rarely is it just physical. It's either physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and one of those 4. And is usually a component of each to every injury. This concept of mental toughness. People talk about, well, you just got to suck it up and you got to be mentally tough. Well, okay. But I'm here to tell you, in 30 years of private practice, I've really been challenged on this. I don't think I've ever seen an athlete or anyone who was seeing me who wasn't mentally tough. We wouldn't be having the conversation if they weren't. They wouldn't be in that position. If they share a common problem, a common frailty, I won't say a failure, but a common frailty, it's a lack, and here's your word, lack of emotional resilience. You see, cognitively, we can go ahead and structure things and we can explain things and, do a schematic and yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, a little decision tree. But it's the emotion that gets these people.
Agree.
It's maybe, look, if you're in the athletic arena, you're not always going to win. You're not always going to prevail. And that's part of the allure. But if you have a problem once, you brush it off. You have a problem twice, you might think about it a little bit. Mm-hmm. You have it 3 times, that's going to keep you awake looking at the ceiling fan at 4 in the morning. And you begin to doubt things. Mm-hmm. If you're injured, and this is regardless of being an athlete or not, we're talking about you impacted in concentric rings. I always explain it to my patients and my students as a pebble in a pond. As point of impact, and that's the actual event. And then there are these concentric rings that go out. And you start to think about each one of those rings representing something, and how far does the disruption go? Mm. How deeply does everybody get affected? Mm. I'm dealing with a very, very dear friend of mine who's been diagnosed with breast cancer. And anybody who knows about breast cancer knows it's not just the patient. Right. It's everybody in their realm. Yeah. It's everything in their realm. And so this emotional resilience, and I find this really kind of amusing because we're living in the era of everybody gets a trophy, et cetera, et cetera. And really, you've got to learn emotional resilience. Mm-hmm. And what we were just speaking of a few moments ago, and you all, gentlemen, you're all fathers, and I never really had the courage to do that. But one of the toughest jobs for a parent must be to allow your kid to skin his knee. Yeah. to watch him do it and just to sit back and go, your better instincts are to save him, and but you're not teaching him anything, and you're robbing him of the ability.
Well, that's one of the things that I identify, in being the parent to my 5 kids is, even if I have that doting, that kind of sensitivity moment, which doesn't happen much, I know that in my own personal life, I better have walked the walk. I'm not a hypocrite in that realm. So when I get hurt, when I do something that limits me, when I have a problem, whether it's degenerative or traumatic, I make sure that my kids see me handle it a certain way. And I believe, I feel
example.
that I am leading by example.
Yes.
And I know that at least when it's their time will come, and everyone's time comes, that example, that process, that consistency is necessary to really set the right message to your kids or to your peers or to your family members or brother or spouse or whoever it is. And as this community grows and evolves, it's about each other. It's about everybody that we bring to the table in this attempt to maximize our overall personal health, fitness, preventative health, and ultimately our global movement. And, well, thank you for this conversation on
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
the mental toughness factor. It is such an important aspect to the starting point for everything foundational to what we do. Thank you for coming to the Comeback podcast. Follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. We're coming out with more and more material as we speak. We have exercises, stretches, fitness patterns that are coming in algorithmic format for activities, for injury patterns, for resiliency patterns, and ultimately for comebacks, for setbacks. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Here we are in Orlando, and have a great day. Thank you.